Good afternoon. I'm Rachel Rosenbloom. I teach at Northeastern University School of Law, and I'm here today with Dolores Huerta. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know that there's a lot of demands on your time.
No, thank you for inviting me.
Um, so I think many people who are watching this video or listening to the podcast will be very familiar with your work. But just in case, for those who aren't, I'm just going to say a couple of brief things about you. And Dolores Huerta was one of the co-founders, along with Cesar Chavez, of the National Farm Workers Association and later the United Farm Workers, and one of the principal architects of the UFW's long-running grape boycott. And in the 1980s and 90s, she became involved in the feminist movement with the Feminist Majority Foundation and other organizations. And in 2002, she founded the Dolores Huerta Foundation, which engages in community organizing and training among low-income communities in California. And I'm leaving out a lot of things because we'd be here all day if I described all your accomplishments. But that's the brief version. And we're speaking today as part of the Ask a Feminist series that the journal Signs is doing. And our topic today is gender and immigrants' rights. So thanks again for joining us.
Good timing.
Yeah. I wanted to start with an issue that has been in the news a lot lately, which is sexual harassment in the workplace. Your roots are in the labor movement. You spent many, many years working with farm workers, including with many women farm workers. What's your perspective on the Me Too movement and the sudden attention in the media and in society to sexual harassment issues in the workplace?
Well, I think it's an outgrowth of the times that we're living in right now. I think with a lot of the statements that Number 45 made about the way that he treated women or objectified women and sexually assaulted women, basically, and the reaction to that with the women's marches, both the one last year and this year. And I think this kind of set the groundwork for women to become so enraged that they decided to start speaking out. And since it did start in Hollywood, of course, it got so much media attention that and when women in Hollywood who have so much they have so much at stake when they come out the way that they did and outed people that had sexually harassed them. I just think that was the inspiration for so many other women to do the same. And when you talk about sexual harassment, then you go on to the next level and you talk about equal pay, equal treatment, promotions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that's what has been kind of the fuel, you might say, that kind of energized the women in the United States of America and all over the world, because we know that this was not limited to the U.S., but that it sparked this deep-seated anger that has been just fuming and festering in so many women that just said, okay, time's up. We just got to get out there and make our thoughts known.
Mm-hmm. Right, and you mentioned that the focus initially was on Hollywood, and that always brings a lot of attention to things, right? As an organizer, you sort of think, how do you get those people to speak out on your issues? And this is an issue that they spoke out on right from the get-go. So I'm wondering about it kind of as a broader movement, because a lot of the initial attention was to Hollywood actresses or to women in kind of highly paid, prominent positions, executives in Silicon Valley, that sort of thing. What do you see as the potential of this movement for women who are in low-wage jobs, women who are working, cleaning hotel rooms, working in the fields, many immigrant women doing those kinds of jobs?
Well, I think it kind of gives them kind of the inspiration that they can also come up. And I think attached to that, there's got to be a lot of information that has to be delivered to working women and to immigrant women, because they don't have that kind of visibility and they don't have the support system that women, you might say women that are in the higher economic levels of our society, they have more protections. They have attorneys, they have people that can really support them when someone comes after them. And of course, working women do not have that type of a support unless they happen to be in a labor union. Otherwise, they're still very vulnerable. Um, and so I think it's up to us also to disseminate information to women, to let them know where they can go, where they can make their complaints, where they can be protected when they do make their complaints. And so while I think it's a big giant leap, you might say, into the future for women, then we have to still think about all of those women who are vulnerable, or because of their jobs, and maybe because with farm workers, because people work as families, then it makes the whole family vulnerable in terms of being fired or some kind of retaliation taken against them. So I think we have to be cognizant of that and do whatever we can in our communities to let women out there know, yes, there is a place where you can report this, and it can be confidential and you can be protected.
Could you talk a little bit about the issues that you saw back in your days with the UFW in terms of sexual harassment that women faced in the fields?
Well, as you know, I'm 87 years old. So I can just say, really, I think honestly, I think the majority of women my age, had to face sexual harassment in all areas of life, and especially on the workplace. But
Mhm.
there were really no laws to protect us. And so we just had to figure out ways so that we could protect ourselves. So to see this happening now at the level that it's happening is just, oh my God, it's almost like unbelievable. And I think a lot of us are just so grateful that it is happening, that women are speaking out, and young women also. So it's really great.
Yeah, I was really struck by that open letter from from women farm workers to Hollywood actresses, in I think back in November, because this issue started with, or the kind of the attention to it started with the Harvey Weinstein allegations and all of the kind of Hollywood focus, and there was a march in Hollywood, and there was this open letter from the farm workers saying, we stand in solidarity with you. We understand what you're going through. And usually it's kind of the other way around. And I noticed when Time's Up was launched earlier this month in the opening statement. I mean, right there, right at the beginning of the statement, by all these people like Meryl Streep, the first thing that's in that statement is that they were inspired by that letter, and that they're, and sort of acknowledging how much these issues cut across class. And so do you think in terms of initiatives like Time's Up, they'll really kind of translate into real changes in the lives of low wage workers?
Well, I think in the lives of all women, but I think we as women have to stand up and make sure that this wave of energy doesn't end, that it goes deeper, and that we make sure that in our workplaces where we work, or in the areas where we can have influence, that we make sure that the discussion continues. But not only that, but that women are not afraid to speak up, but also to know that when they do speak up, they can be protected. I mean, as you know, in our state legislatures all over the country, many of the state legislatures had kind of rules in the legislatures to protect the men that were doing the harassing instead of protecting the women. And so that's another area where I think that we have to really look and kind of examine every single state legislature. Okay, what do your rules look like? Because if it doesn't start at the highest offices like the Congress and the Senate and our state legislatures, it gives us a little hope for what we can do below that level. And so yeah, but I think it's up to women. It's up to women to start asking the questions. We've got the momentum right now. We've got the energy, but we can't let it die down. And I think that's what really worries me sometimes, when you have some real public display of energy from people that want to change things, but then they think that the message is the end, and the message is not the end. The message is the beginning. And
Yeah,
so we've got to act on
spoken
the
like an organizer. Yeah, it's a long term effort, right?
absolutely.
Um, so uh, I wanted to now switch gears a little bit and talk about what's going on in terms of immigrant rights organizing in this country. And when you were getting started as an organizer, there were very few women in leadership positions in the labor movement or in really any movement, and your work was groundbreaking in
Well,
part
I challenge
because of
that.
that.
I want to
Yeah.
challenge
Okay. Please
because
do.
I know we say that, and we always say, well, like in history, you don't see a lot of women, but actually, you look at every single movement. Whether it be the labor movement, you think of the garment workers union, the strikes that they had in New York City, for instance, and it was all women led. And so, in all of these different movements that we have, you have a lot of women that are in leadership and they're on the front line. The problem is when the history gets written, they only
Mm,
recognize the men. And same thing with the civil rights movement. You had a lot
mm,
of women besides Rosa Parks. You had Dorothy Cotton. You had many other women that were out there in the front line. And yet, when the books get written, they only focus on the men. And so,
mm,
I think we have to kind of challenge the way that history is written to make sure that the women are included. And in the labor movement also, you've had women in the front lines, and sometimes they get overlooked. I like to say that when the dust settles and you institutionalize a movement, when you start putting the positions of power and they get either voted in or delegated or whatever, then that's where the women get, they kind of drop off. They
mm.
drop off the radar, and then they're not included in the power structure of that organization.
Well, that's a point well taken. So thank you for that, for pointing that out to me. You're absolutely right. But nevertheless, I would say that at the time that you were organizing, there were very few women who were in official positions of power of the sort you had, of vice president of the UFW.
That's
And what I'm struck by when I look out, for example, at the undocumented, the Dreamer movement today, is how many women are really young women are really prominent in that movement, and how many people who identify as LGBTQ. And I'm just wondering if you have thoughts on kind of how those issues have moved in over the course of your lifetime, of the kind of evolution of gender and sexuality issues within the labor movement, within immigrant rights, or within kind of progressive organizing more generally. I've read your recollections of sitting there and copying down sexist, or keeping note of how many sexist comments were made during meetings and that kind of thing. Do you think there's been some positive change on that front?
I think that there has. I think it's kind of hard to measure it because I think in many instances women are still hesitant to bring up. Say you have an open meeting with all of your boss or the partners in the organization, or even in nonprofit organizations, whatever. And sometimes women hear those sexist remarks, or they hear women getting put down, but they just haven't found the courage, or can't find the courage to speak up when that happens. And but I think that what's happening now is just giving women the feeling that they can actually speak up when these things are happening. And sometimes we don't have the vocabulary either, to say to someone, you just made a sexist remark, or that really is on the fringe here of sexual harassment, because
Mhm,
we have had this good old boy network for so long, and
mhm,
so I think it's all we have to enable women to be able to speak up. So while we see it really strong on the national level, it's kind of hard to know what's happening in some little poor young town. And I think we can actually, as my daughter says, free two birds from one cage, and that is we can. I think in terms of digging down and making permanent change, that we do have the structure to do that in our society, and that's our educational structure. But we have to really look at all the different levels of our educational structure and start changing the way that we teach women. We have to teach women to be strong. We have to teach women that they do not have to be victims, that they
mhm,
can stand up, that they can be leaders, that they can be assertive, and that they don't have to hold back. But it's going to take a lot of teaching at every level, starting with the pre-K level, to
mhm,
say, to inculcate young girls, yes, you are equal to the young man sitting next to you in your classroom, to the boy sitting next to you. Because we know that even when I speak, oftentimes even with like elementary school children, and I'll say to them, that boys and girls are equal? And the boys will say, no. And the girls, of course, will smile and they'll clap. So it starts at that level. So I think that that's what we have to start thinking about. And the same thing with racism. We have to start teaching at the pre-kindergarten level to children for the contributions of people of color to build our country in the United States of America and to build our world, you know, so that we can get rid of racism and we can get rid of misogyny and homophobia. But it's got to start when the kids are really, really young. And so,
Mhm.
people shouldn't have to wait to get to college to get women's studies or ethnic studies, or labor studies for that matter. And I think that's got to be, if we think about the work ahead of us, I think that's where we have to start. Change the content of our educational system, train teachers, give them the materials. I think materials are already out there. We just have to, show people how they can access those materials and start saying we want to make a permanent change. This is not just about one march that women, women participate in. It's about making permanent change to make sure that that girls are not objectified, that they're not just sex objects, that they're equal to men in our society and that they get the same resources as men do for their education, for their jobs, for early childcare, so that every woman can be uh, active in civil life and in civic engagement.
Mhm. So where did you learn those lessons? Because clearly you learned those at an early age. Where did they come from in your own life?
I was very fortunate because I was raised by my mother. She divorced my father, thank goodness, because I don't know what my life would have been like had my father been in my life. Because my mother and my parents divorced when I was very, very young. I think I was like 2 years old or something like that. And I did live with my father from time to time, but I mean, no comparison. My mother was just such a dominant figure. My dad was, well, I wouldn't say he was a chauvinist, but he was a very handsome man. A lot of women were attracted to him, and he was married like 6 times or something like that. So, and he was. My mother divorced him because he was abusive to her, and so she had the courage way back then in the 30s to divorce my dad, and she divorced my stepfather also. So it's kind of a tradition in our family that we divorce more than more than one. But again, for women to be able to leave their husbands, and she was a businesswoman, and so and I think she was my example of being strong. And
Mhm.
always she would always say to me, "Don't forget to speak. Always have the courage to speak out." Even when you think you might say the wrong thing, because you can always correct it. But you've got to be able to let people know what you think, especially let them know what your ideas are.
Uh-huh.
You know? And I think a lot of women we just remain silent because we're afraid we're going to be criticized. And
Mhm.
so we have to figure out how we implant that courage. And I think those seeds of courage need to be put into young women when they're in school. And we forget about this nonsense that Prince Charming is going to come by and give you a kiss and wake you up and you're going to live happily ever after, which we know is just such a falsehood and such a myth.
Mhm. Um, so coming back now to the feminist movement, which you've been involved with for many years, and we've also been talking about all these other issues. We're talking a little bit about immigrant rights, and you've alluded to a bunch of other issues, and I know you work. Your foundation works on a lot of issues. You kind of epitomize multi-issue organizing. So I wanted to ask you about intersectionality, which is really a word you hear a lot these days within feminist organizing. Um, and you came to feminism after many years in the labor movement. Your foundation works on criminal justice, school to prison pipeline issues, and environmental issues, and economic justice issues. How does your feminism shape your approach to all those issues, and how does your involvement in all those issues shape your feminism?
Well, I think, as I said, my mother was a feminist, and I always saw women in terms of uh, that not only the necessity for women to be in power. I think I understood all of the issues of feminism except one, and that was the right to abortion. And
Mhm.
that's because of my Catholic upbringing. And when you start going to church when you're a little kid, and you hear everything that the priests have to say, and then you kind of get tainted, I think, with those I would call them in a way false values. And so to be able to change my mind on that issue. It was, I have to say, it was a struggle. It was a struggle. I have 11 kids, so you can see where my head was at. And so that was difficult for me. But in a way, I'm glad I went through that, because then it helps me to be able to uh, transfer that transition to other women, especially to Latina women, to make them understand that this is a basic right that women need to have, and access to abortion. That this is a human right that women need to have, because if you cannot have control over your own body, it's very hard to control anything else. But
Hmm.
it was difficult. But I think in other respects, I did consider myself a feminist, except for that one issue, which I know is a basic issue to be called a feminist.
Hmm.
And I have to say, with Eleanor Smeal and Gloria Steinem, both of uh, two women that I really respect and treasure, that got me to come to that idea that abortion and women's access to abortion is a human right.
Hmm. People evolve over time, right? Movements evolve over time. And actually, so another thing that's on my mind on that subject of kind of evolving over time, not to get into things that happen, in the distant past, but I think it's safe to say that the labor movement has evolved a lot on the issue of undocumented immigrants, from a kind of a protectionist view to a much more supportive view.
Well, I have to say this, so, and I think sometimes the labor movement gets a bad rap on that, because back in 1986, when I was working on the amnesty bill
Hmm.
to get undocumented people to become to get their legalization status in the United States, the labor movement was very supportive. There were certain labor unions like SEIU, AFSCME, etc., that were
Hmm.
very, very supportive. You're right, it has evolved, but I think it's been evolving, not just recently, but been evolving over the last couple of decades.
Right, it has been. I mean, and I think, I mean, there's sort of different kinds of evolution. And if you look at the labor movement, there's the sort of evolving from a more protectionist stance to a more supportive stance. And then if you look at the feminist movement, what I see is kind of evolving from not paying any attention to those kinds of issues to paying quite a bit. When I go to a women's march now, you see signs for DACA and the Dream Act, and you see all these things. In the '90s, you'd go to a women's march, and it would just be a sea of pro-choice signs. It was kind of a single issue. Um,
And I think
so yeah.
we have to give credit to the dreamers for doing that. Uh, because the dreamers, came out and they were very visible. They organized on a national level to get people to support them to get the Dream Act in the first place, and all of the immigrants' rights organizations. And and again, when we talk about the labor movement, remember that there's like labor is composed of so many different organizations. So you had some organizations like Unite Here, for instance, the Garment Workers Union. They were in the forefront of the immigrants' rights fight like 20 years ago. Organizations like the Laborers Union, the SEIU, Service Employees International Union. So you had several of the teachers, they were kind of in the forefront of fighting for the immigrant rights movement. And you had
Mhm.
some of the more traditional, the building trades were maybe a little bit more, you might say, late to the game, late to the party. But I would say that generally the labor movement has been, again, on the policy level, they've been very supportive of the.
I used to be a union side labor lawyer, so I've experienced some of those differences between unions about certain issues like that. But just in terms of the present day, I guess what I'd just love to hear your thoughts on what the role of undocumented immigrants is now, right now, in kind of in the landscape of social justice organizing in the United States.
Well, I think the immigrant rights movement is a really major part of the activism that is taking place right now, and in bringing groups together, as you said, when you were in the Women's March, you saw signs that were supporting immigrants' rights also in DACA, and so I think that they have probably been kind of the glue that has created this intersectionality that we're talking about.
Hmm. So, um, I think my final question to you has to do with the times that we are living through now, the complicated times that we're living through now. We've got a white nationalist in the White House who's attacking immigrants, who's attacking women, who's attacking Muslims, who's attacking everyone, basically. And I teach at a law school, so I've got a lot of my students are in their 20s. And we have many activist students, and they're having a hard time coping. Right, this is sort of a new thing to them to have this kind of I mean, in some ways, it's a new thing for all of us. But I think I'm just curious. You've lived through so much. I mean, you lived through McCarthyism and Nixon and Reagan and good times, bad times. What do you say to younger activists about how to get through moments like this and how to sustain oneself?
Well, as an organizer, I see this as a great organizing opportunity because when people are challenged, that we are being challenged right now, then I think it really gives people the motivation to get involved. If they have been involved before, and this is the time to do it. Because number 45 is attacking so many people, so I think that really gives us a chance to say, okay, we've got to stand up, not only for ourselves, but for these other brothers and sisters and these other movements that are also under attack. So, but I think, and I'm glad we were talking a little bit more about labor, because at the end of the day, when we say, okay, feminists will be served, hopefully, we don't know. I think hopefully we can keep Roe versus Wade. Um, we will get some kind of I think the DACA students are going to be saved according to the latest news today. Hopefully it doesn't change tomorrow.
Right, it's complicated, yeah.
But I think that the two issues that we have to always include when we talk about intersectionality and the work that we do, again, besides the civil rights issues, criminal justice issues, are of course the environmental issues, to make sure that they're always, kind of converge with the other work that we do, so that we realize that we have to do something to stop global warming. And then the other thing I'm going to say are economic issues. And I think that's the area where number 45 is going to try to trick people like he just did with the tax reform bill, making it very public that so these people got $1,000 bonus. By the way, one of my grandsons was one of those because he works for the Bank of America. But my grandson realizes that $1,000 is just kind of a little buy-off where because they're giving away millions, but they're going to save billions of dollars when it comes to the taxes that they're supposed to be paying. So we can't take the economic issues off of the table. We've got to keep those in front of us, because at the same time that Wall Street is having a windfall, we see more people that are homeless. We see rents that are going to be rising. We see gentrification, and where people don't have a place to live. And so when we talk about this intersectionality, let's keep the economic issues always as part of that conversation, to make sure that we don't forget that we don't forget about people that are having to work two jobs to be able to pay rent and make a living and just to put food on the table, and that we get involved. And in California, by the way, we're going to be doing a, a proposition on the ballot to make commercial properties pay their fair share of taxes. It's called the Make It Fair campaign. And at the bottom of all of this, of course, is the vote. And I'm glad I'm sitting behind
Yeah, I
this.
was going to ask you about that. Tell us about the background.
With our foundation, the Dolores Huerta Foundation, of course, this is part of the work that we do, is to make sure that people get out there and register to vote. We do canvassing, we do phone banking. I'm actually sitting in our phone bank room right now, and we do this as part of a statewide organization called California Calls. Okay, and we do canvassing and phone banking to make and voter registration to make sure that people vote. And we're going to be doing a massive campaign, of course, here in California. But we want to invite people in these other states like Texas and, register to vote. And I know it's difficult for people to register. They make it very hard for people to register to vote, but find a way to do that. Because and this is what I'm saying, is our only hope right now for 2018 is to build our own wall in the Congress of progressive congressional leaders that will stop all of the stuff that's coming out of the White House, all of the negative stuff that's coming out of the White House. And we shouldn't leave our labor brothers and sisters behind, organized labor. So I know our agenda is a full one, but I think if we keep supporting each other, that we will be able to get a lot of our agenda through. And one thing I like to remind people, and I like to say, people, you missed the 60s, well, they're back. Welcome.
Great.
But
Wow.
but in the 60s and the 70s, and when all of these organizations were being just beginning, you might say they were just in the birthing stages. The Green Movement, the LGBT movement, the second wave of the women's movement, the Chicano Latino civil rights movement. These were all being born, environmental movement. But guess what? We're all institutionalized now.
Hmm.
When we lived through the 60s and came out of the 60s and the 70s, we were a lot stronger, and we were able to change the culture and the policies of the United States of America. And you know what? I think when we come out of this era that we're living in right now, we're going to have the same thing's going to happen, because I have so many more people who have become engaged and are becoming involved in movement building and fighting for these causes that we've been talking about today. So I think we're going to come out stronger. And as I go around, there's a film about myself called Dolores that Carlos Santana produced, and I've been following it around all over the country. And I do that basically to just implore people: please get involved, please register to vote, please go out there and volunteer on campaigns to get other people out to vote. And then I've been also quoting the Chilean poet Pablo Neruda, who said, "They can cut all the flowers, but they can't hold back the spring. They can cut all the flowers, but they can't hold back the spring." So I think we are the spring that's going to come back with full force, with many flowers of justice that are going to be blooming, and we will smell victory at the end of this, when we get through this stage. Because then we see all of the things that need to be corrected that are now so defined and so visible. And as a person of color and as women, we all live through this sexual harassment as part of our lives. And with people of color, these uh, discrimination and microaggressions that you live with every single day. So whatever we can do now in this chaotic state that we're in, to be able to organize to change it, we have to do it. And I think we will come out ahead. What I've been doing is I'm going around speaking to audiences. I say, "Who's got the power?" And I want everybody to say, "We've got the power." Who's got the? I mean, okay, who's got the power? We've got the power. What kind of power? People power. And then we say, "Can we go out there and organize?" We say, "Yes, we can. Si se puede."
And you are, of course, the originator of that term. We have that term because of you. And it's amazing, that term. Where would we be without it, right? I mean, it's a rallying cry for so many people now. Every demonstration I go to, and we have you to thank for that.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you. On that note, I think that's what I'm gonna show that clip of you saying that to my students every time they come to me and say, it's all they're losing hope, because
But
that will
also, yeah,
certainly.
ask them also you probably already do this, but like Michael Moore says, there's 3 things you should do when you wake up in the morning: wash your face, brush your teeth, and call your congressperson. Okay, so so ask your students to please call their congressperson to demand that they vote on a clean DACA bill. And to thank those senators that have stood up for the DACA students. And we can make that part of our daily ritual, to call our congressperson on some pending legislation. And I also ask them to get involved if they possibly can. Get involved in a campaign, because I believe that knocking on doors, talking to people, or even phone banking, that gives them kind of uh, the emotional fortitude. I call it organizing 101. This is the way I got started in organizing, by going out there and talking to people door to door, imploring them to please vote. And I think that kind of gave me the emotional fortitude that I needed to continue to be an organizer.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today. It
You're
was really
welcome.
wonderful
The
with you.
film is going to be on on PBS, the Independent Lens, on March 27th. So
March 27th. Wonderful. Good. Thank you so much.
thank you, Rachel. Thank you very much.